Hello and welcome. We're going to talk tonight about a topic that some of you may say, that sounds a little dry. We're going to talk about ranked choice voting. But I hope you stick with us because I think as you listen to my guest and think about what he's saying, you'll find that it's really a much deeper and more fascinating topic than the words might imply. So my guest tonight is Dr. Thomas Kuhlman. He's a psychologist here in Minneapolis. He's been writing a book called 2.0 Voting, an Upgrade for the New Millennium. And it's not going to be out, Tom, is it, in the near future, but...
Before the next millennium it will be, at least.
You are in the midst of it.
Yes.
What is a psychologist doing writing a book about voting?
Well, I can just tell you how I first got interested in it. I didn't set out to write a book about voting, but over the years, as a member of the American Psychological Association, every year we would have to elect officers for the association. And about 15 years ago, the association started using ranked choice voting to choose the officers, and 5 psychologists would run for the president of the American Psychological Association and so forth. So we were asked to, instead of just pick out one psychologist to vote for, we were asked to rank them 1 to 5. There were, and there now are, only 5 candidates that run. And they would run campaigns through the professional journals and so forth. And we would rank the candidates, and then I would rank my vote and send it in and not think about it. And then after the election was published, they wouldn't just say who the winner was, they would show how the winner accumulated a majority of the psychologists' votes.
So you were ahead of the curve as a group, weren't you?
I think the American Psychological Association was. There are other professional associations that have been ahead of the curve as well, and many now elect their officers that way, as do labor unions, as do many colleges now use ranked choice voting in electing their class officers and so forth. So it's something that has a sort of a groundswell in a lot of different kinds of organizations, and including, of course, now it's moved into municipal elections, such as we have starting here in Minneapolis.
So you got interested in that process, but then to decide to write a book about it, that's a whole nother leap in terms of a decision.
That's correct. I suppose I was motivated more by just trying to get something new, introduce people to something new and introduce it to them in a bit more depth than they would normally encounter it. Nowadays, you will hear the slogans. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3, and make every vote count. And then there's the slogans of people who are against ranked choice voting and so forth. And you tend to get a lot of sound bites. It's a little more complex than that, but there's a certain sort of beauty to it, how the majority reaches a consensus that I would like to spell out for people and show people how it's been used, where it's been used, some interesting elections where it's been used and so forth as a alternative to the standard voting that's been going on in this country for 250 years, I suppose. And
it must also be that it's important for you, or you feel it's important to get people on board in terms of looking at this because it's a better way, in your opinion.
I do believe it's a better way, yes.
To elect people, and it's better for our democracy. And
it's a better for, if we are going to be a democracy that rules by majority rule, it's a much more efficient and consensual way of finding the majority. In essence, it gives the voters a deeper voice in elections. Instead of just choosing one person to vote for, they choose 3 or 5, or in some cases 7. The Academy Awards now asks the voters to vote for the best picture with 10. That's a bit steep, but in any event, with each additional choice that you make, you have a greater depth of expression of your own belief about if I can't have this candidate is the one I would like to have, and what your private reasons are remain your private reasons, but you stay into the election further if its election is competitive and doesn't have a odds-on favorite.
There are a lot of benefits I want to ask you about and some drawbacks in some people's minds. But first, just walk us through when we in Minneapolis are going to be going to vote for mayor soon. This interview, by the way, is being taped on October 21st. And we're going to talk with Tom now about ranked choice voting. And then he's going to come back after the election in Minneapolis and kind of analyze how it worked. But when I walk into the voting booth, I'll be able to choose my top 3 candidates, correct?
There will be 35 candidates on the ballot, and you'll be allowed to make 3 selections. You will vote for a first choice candidate, your second preference candidate, and your third preference candidate. And the election board in Minneapolis has limited it to 3 candidates, and so that's all that you'll be able to vote for. You will be able to write someone in, I believe, on any of the 3 slots as well, but there's plenty to choose from with 35 candidates.
So then when the election is being counted, walk us through how that works just quickly.
Well, the first count is a standard election count, just like we've been doing for
Forever.
the past 2.5 centuries. The first preference votes of all of the candidates are counted first. And if any candidate gets more than 50% of that vote, the election is over, that candidate wins. So in that event, everyone's second and third choice votes will probably not count.
It's a moot point, so to speak.
That's correct. And what this means is if a candidate is the choice of the whole majority, as occurred 4 years ago when Mayor Ryback was up for re-election, I believe with 9 other candidates in 2009. He came away with 72% of the first preference votes. He was the winner after the first round, and all of the additional rankings that voters made came to naught. But again, the point of it isn't to necessarily count all the rankings. The point of it is to find the majority choice of the electorate that's involved, and he was clearly the majority choice.
So if no one gets more than 50%, then we start looking at all the second choice, right?
Well, we don't look at all the second choice votes. What we do, then it becomes, you look at the lowest finishing candidate. The candidate finished number 35.
Oh, okay.
The candidate that finished number 35 is eliminated from the election. And that means all of the people that voted for that person as the first choice candidate, their first choice votes are voided. But they are not disenfranchised from the election like the 35th candidate is. They stay in the election, and if they made a second choice on their ballots, their votes go to their second choice candidate, and they travel up to the second choice candidate.
So the voter is not disenfranchised at all during the process.
That's correct.
Their choice might be.
The candidates are eliminated, but the
Right.
voters stay in as long as all 3 candidates named on their ranked choice ballot are still in the running. So what happens after the lowest candidate's eliminated, the second choice votes of that person's first choice supporters migrate up as compromising votes to different candidates. Then another count is taken, and another count looks and sees, was the first choice person cross 50%, or perhaps a second choice person would, we don't know. And if someone passes 50% of the vote on that count, then that person's declared the winner. But as we're expecting in Minneapolis with 35 candidates, no clear favorite, we're not expecting that to happen. So what happens then, if no one gets 50%, then the next lowest candidate, whoever finished number 34, is eliminated, and their second choice votes travel up to higher finishing candidates, and the process repeats itself over and over again until one of the candidates at the top crosses the 50% threshold,
So
which
it
is
might be a
majority vote.
long, late night for the judges.
Yes, it could be. It could be there are core candidates who are pretty widely recognized. I believe there's 5 of them that are considered major candidates. It could be a long night for the judges, but one can't tell because it's such a new system, we can't see what's going to happen.
Now, this whole concept started way back in 1980, I understand.
I think it was first introduced into this country by John Anderson, who was a third-party candidate. He was actually a Republican congressman from Illinois who ran as an independent candidate against Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. I believe he could not subscribe to the more conservative views of Mr. Reagan. So he did not win that election. He finished third, as many people do, and he said, but there's something wrong with this system. And he began to look at some of the systems that are used in Europe today and the concept of single transferable vote. And I believe the person that actually invented ranked choice voting was back in the 1870s, a man named Ware, and it's called the Ware method. And he's the
Back
person
in
that pretty much
1870s?
1870. It was actually invented 1870, but it's pretty much been neglected.
Up until John Anderson.
And part of the reason it's been elected is because it really does not work to the advantage of either of the 2 major parties in a 2-party system.
So the Republicans and the Democrats, they're equally nervous about it, Tom?
I would say so, although in Minneapolis or in Minnesota, the Democratic Party has almost come around to endorsing ranked choice voting. I wouldn't say they rushed to do so, but of the organizations in the United States that have not used ranked choice voting, most notable are the National Republican Party, the National Democratic Party, all of the state Republican parties, and I believe 48 of the Democratic state parties have not used ranked choice voting. And so that tells you that this is something that they really don't want to see happen.
The major parties are nervous about. Now, tell us why it's really good for the independent voters in our country, the independent party.
I don't know that it's necessarily good for the independent voters, except, well, I suppose it would be, because they will get more choice. We'll have more of a free marketplace of political ideas. The new parties that come about probably will not be trusted right away by the older generations who've been raised up and imprinted with the Democratic and Republican parties. But they'll at least have new ideas to offer, and perhaps many voters will name them as second or third choices out of deference to the new ideas. And from an election like that, they may feel that they're getting a certain sort of toehold or some traction and move forward, and we may have more competition from, a new marketplace of ideas, an open marketplace of ideas, rather than the same 2 choices all the time.
And in your book, the draft of the book, you say the spoiler vote won't be an issue as it has been, where a person votes for someone that we know doesn't have a chance, but then it affects the major parties.
Yes, we've had 2 presidential elections, which one favored the Democrats and one favored the Republicans by a spoiler vote. In 1992, Ross Perot is widely viewed as having taken away a considerable amount of votes from George H.W. Bush, enabling Clinton to win that election. And then again in 2000, it worked the opposite way. George W. Bush won the election in part because Ralph Nader took votes away from Albert Gore. But under ranked choice voting, what happens is that you don't spoil the election. What happens is in 1992, probably Perot's votes, the second choice votes underneath Perot when he was eliminated, which would likely have gone to Bush, may well have led to Bush winning a second term, just as Gore may well have won the presidential election in 2000 if the second choice of Nader voters had gone that way.
So it can really change elections, can't it?
In competitive ones. One of the things I'm trying to tell people, though, is that of the first 4 presidential elections of the new millennium, the way they've turned out, ranked choice voting would not have played a role in the last 3, but it would have played a big role in 2000. When the voters have a clear favorite and express it as they did for Mayor Ryback 4 years ago, ranked choice voting will almost be sort of dormant and not
But
active.
it's when it's close.
When things are close and the majorities, we can't divine the majority's will very well, that's when it activates.
And you also in the book say that you think ranked choice voting will mean a decrease in negative campaigning. And that's an important point for us right now as Americans.
I would say negative campaigning works to some extent because there's only one other viable choice for you to have. So if you
Right.
make a negative statement stick to your opponent in the current two-party system, you are the beneficiary. But it's also well known that negative campaigning is not liked by voters. They sometimes vote on basis of the information they get from it, but they don't like it. If there are several other candidates in the race, that vote won't necessarily come back to the second party of the two-party system. And in fact, the people, the other candidates competing may be the beneficiaries because people don't like candidates who sling mud.
So that's another positive for this whole system.
It is, and I would say too, in the campaigns that we've studied, not just the American Psychological Association, which I'm most familiar with, but in the states where ranked choice voting already has a stake, the Bay Area of San Francisco for one, the campaigns tend to be very positive. Candidates form coalitions before the election. They support each other. They have joint fundraisers. They say things like, well, if you're going to vote for me, I want to be your first choice, but so-and-so should be your second choice because he or she agrees with me on such and so forth and so on. So it's very much helps the majority
A little more of a cooperative mood, isn't it?
Move towards the consensus that a majority is going to want, as opposed to what tends to happen in two-party elections, which is create great differences and tar and feather the other side if you can, and
Right.
figure that's going to come back to oneself.
Right. Right now, is ranked choice voting something that is decided upon by each municipality, by each state that decides to look at the issue? I mean, it's not being done all over.
It's not the same in every jurisdiction. It can be in Minnesota. It appears to be a municipal decision primarily.
In some states,
recently,
it's not.
And it also depends on the kind of city that you're in. If you have a charter, it's different than if you have a different kind of arrangement.
So it's a real hodgepodge.
And it almost has to be a sort of grassroots. Once the idea catches voters' intentions, you have to go to your local precinct or district and figure out how do we introduce this and get this to the voters.
Do you know if there's any kind of a movement to make it a national rule, a national law, that we would have this in every state and every city?
No, I'm quite sure there's no national movement.
Nothing like that.
I'm quite sure of that, and that's partly because I think it's in the interest of the major parties to not allow that to happen. And there are certain pockets of this, starting in the Bay Area and San Francisco it's very prominent. Portland, Oregon, Vermont, and Maine have ranked choice voting to some extent. I believe Maine is the other state where the Democratic Party is on the verge of approving it, or and so forth and so on. But it tends to be in pockets. Most of them are the more democratic states and so forth and so on. But there are some.
It'll be very interesting to see if this starts taking off. I mean, the positives surely seem to be, persuasive. Are there any negatives? And we have just a minute left, but boom, boom, boom. Are there some negatives besides the cumberness of explaining it to people?
The one negative is that, if you consider it negative, is voters should have to pay more attention. They have to look at the candidates more. It isn't just a quick
But I'd call that a
decision.
positive.
Well, call it a positive, but
But some
it's considered
people might.
work. It's considered
More work, more research needed.
There are individuals that maintain that less educated and less acculturated voters will not understand the concept as well as more educated, acculturated voters, and that this will put them at a disadvantage. The data doesn't appear to support that, but that's the sort of thing being said. So if it's said enough comes
Well,
true.
we will have to wait and see how it works here in Minneapolis very, very soon. As I said earlier, Tom is going to come back, and after the mayoral election here, he'll talk with us more about how this actually worked in Minneapolis. So I'll say good night now, and thank you for this explanation. It's a fascinating topic, and I hope it works well, but we'll have you give us the lowdown.
I'm looking forward to
after the election.
I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
We'll be back. Hello and welcome back. Dr. Tom Kuhlman is back. The Minneapolis mayoral and city council elections have been held, and we're going to get his reaction. If you're like me, you've been reading the papers and seeing a lot of analysis, but Dr. Kuhlman, as I had said earlier, has been writing a book on this big topic of ranked choice voting. And so you were paying very rapt attention to the proceedings, weren't you?
Yeah, I was.
What did you think, Tom? What were your main reactions?
I think things went very well. In the lead up to the election, there were people stating that the voting method was too complex, and a lot of less educated, less acculturated people would be intimidated away from the polls. But actually, 4 years ago, the first time we had ranked choice voting, about 20% of the electorate came to the polls. This time, 34% came. So that's an increase of 70%, and it suggests the method was not intimidating to people, did not keep turnout down by any means. And that is perhaps the most important side of it.
And a big increase, especially because it wasn't a presidential year for election.
It was a big increase in part because the former mayor, who was very popular 4 years ago, was not running. We had an open seat.
Right. And we had, as you Minneapolis folks know, 35 candidates. And I just brought, in case you didn't go to the polls, and quite a few of you didn't, here's what the ballot looked like. And it probably was a little daunting for people who hadn't read a lot about it ahead of time. But basically, it wasn't a big problem or process, was it?
It was not. I believe the rate of undervotes, there was 811 out of 34,000, which is a low rate. But there was not a lot of problems with voters completing the ballots. There were some people asking questions at the precincts, but really not a big problem with people handling the ballots, even though there were so many candidates and 3 different ways to vote for them.
The complaint that I read the most about, and I don't know if you heard the most about this, was the slow tabulation.
Well, all of us were aware of the slow tabulation, waiting 3 days for the results, or actually it was 50 hours, I believe. The slow tabulation is due in part to the rules that were set up, which stated that a candidate who had any chance of moving up 1 spot, even if it was from 34 to 33rd, had to be treated individually, and the votes counted individually and then transferred to the higher finishing candidate if that person was eliminated. That rule, which sort of meant they had to go 1 candidate at a time and reassign 1 candidate at a time, when mathematically they could probably have handled 5 at a time. That added a lot of time on the end of it. But then the other thing, I read this in the paper, someone said, well, why do we have to have the results right away if it's a more slow, painstaking process? You know, the mayor-elect isn't going to take office till January, and so...
Patience, people, huh?
The one way people were penalized, though, is some of the city council races that were also waiting for the instant runoff vote count. They had to wait till the mayoral one was done. So those people I have a little more concern
they were
about.
chomping at the bit.
It's going to be a long wait.
But is there any way to get around this other than to increase the fee for filing?
Increasing the fee for filing will probably reduce the number of candidates, which of course would reduce the number of votes to be counted. There are vote counting machines that could handle, I don't no, I can't say they can handle 34 candidates, but they can handle things. The problem with them is getting them certified and approved by the state of Minnesota is a longer, drawn-out process, and they could not get it done in time for this election. The vote counting machines in the precincts could accept the ballots and tabulate, but the more complex vote transferring technology is there, but it's not been approved and probably not tested enough.
The complaint that I heard just from neighbors, from people when I was voting, was a question that I think you can debunk, but it was by putting my second and third choices down, am I possibly undercutting my number one choice person's chances? And your response to that, Tom?
This is mathematically conceivable. However, the conditions under which that could happen are so remote that it would be considered virtually impossible. It would also involve some collusion between two candidates that would be very difficult to conceal. So without going into detail, I don't think anyone needs to be concerned about that. It's actually much more probable, for example, that the popular vote for the United States for president would end up as an exact tie, and the Electoral College would end up as an exact tie. That's a higher probability under our old system than the one where two parties collude, three parties of equal power, two parties collude to name their own candidate's second choice, and the odd one out is penalized.
Do you think people around the country were looking at how we handle things here in Minneapolis in a way that we're going to be a model, or will people be saying we want to learn from Minneapolis?
I think we will be a model. I think that the Bay Area of California is about 10 years ahead of us here, and they are more of a model than we are. But this is a different area than that, a different part of the country. So in that way, it will be.
Well, when you get your book done, we'll have you come back and we can talk more in depth. As I mentioned, Tom is writing a book called 2.0 Voting, an Upgrade for the New Millennium. There's a lot of sociology I'd love to talk about with you behind this book and this title. So thank you very much for coming down and giving us a too brief, but all we have time for analysis here on the election, Tom. And best of luck with the completion of the book.
Thank you, and I'll be glad to come back when it's finished.
Okay, it's a promise. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.